Thanks very much. I always say a PhD is just a qualification in learning. That's all it is, and that's probably the main thing that I took away with me from my PhD. If you ask me anything else about it, I won't remember. I can't even remember what the title is, quite frankly. So don't let it fool you. Okay, so I'm Sorrel Harriet. I'm a former academic turned learning coach. I've given myself this title, which might seem a little bit pretentious, but I'll explain why. So I've been trying to sell this idea of learning as a service for a couple of years now. What this sort of hinges on is the idea that in order for sort of organisations to, and individuals to kind of thrive in this complex and uncertain world we live in, we need to be continuous learners, and that the best way to learn is not through sort of step-by-step online courses or reading the manual, it is in situ. But what this means is that we need to look at learning as a capability or a set of capabilities that over a lifetime we need to continuously kind of hone. So that can sometimes involve a bit of relearning, especially depending on our experiences of education or our life experiences. We don't all enter the workplace equipped or as well equipped for learning as we could be. So that's kind of what learning as a service is about. It's about trying to sort of cultivate those sort of attitudes, behaviours that support learning in situ, effectively. It might not surprise you to learn that it's not been the easiest thing to sell. I'm working on it. So I have a day job. I also work at the University of Leeds as a research software engineer, which allows me to fulfil another passion which I have, which is trying to facilitate knowledge exchange between industry and academia. This is something because I've kind of spent my career kind of ping-ponging back and forth between industry and academia, and I've always felt wherever I am, they do it so much better over there, or we could be learning so much from each other. So that's another reason why I'm here. And the topic of my talk today is about critical thinking, which is one of many essential capabilities for individuals and what I believe agile teams. And I'm going to come to what it means in it shortly. I'm going to credit a couple of consulting academics here, so some people from my team over in Leeds University, also PhDs. Because the talk that I'm giving today, it kind of draws on a recurring conversation that I've had with them about how science frequently gets used to sell. So whether it's the latest framework or methodology that some consultant somewhere's dreamt up. So this kind of use of science as a means of selling, it crops up everywhere. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes it's not very compelling science. When you lift up the layers, you find that actually, this is a bit questionable. And we can waste a lot of time and energy chasing the latest fad, which doesn't turn out to be any better than the last one. So first of all, we're living in a very complex world. What do you think of the poem? Quite profound, isn't it? Who do you think wrote that? Yeah. Do you think I've got time to write poems? No. Another reason, so this kind of relates to our approaches to learning. So it seems to me like we're often, whether or not by choice, but like we're looking for shortcuts to learning, because you have to go through stuff and you have to make mistakes and you have to, sit and think about it and drink half a bottle of wine or whatever you do. It's expensive and people don't like that, do they? They want shortcuts. Somebody shared a good analogy with me recently about mechanics having these, I don't know if this is true, I'm not a mechanic, but having these step-by-step guides on how to assemble an engine in their garage. Is it a garage that they work? Yeah, it's a garage. But no one ever learns to assemble an engine that way, do they? You reference it as and when you need it. That's really how most of us learn. And I think Shane gave, sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly, but you gave some lovely examples of in situ learning in your talk. So so why do we teach people like that? I'm not going to learn anything from a click-through course more than I'd learn how to fashion a wardrobe from assembling IKEA flat pack furniture. It's not learning. And finally, also, I couldn't not mention AI, could I? How can we learn stuff faster? How can we deliver stuff faster, but not necessarily good stuff? It happens in academia as well. We're not safe. We've got recent evidence of ChatGPT saturation. Anyway, there is no shortcut to learning, is what I believe. What we can do is we can try to do it well equipped. Like, we can embark on the journey of learning well prepared or poorly prepared. We want to be well prepared, then we need to invest in the skills like the critical thinking and a multitude of other things. So learning as a service is about an enabling approach to learning. I'm going to focus more on techniques we can use to evaluate the strength of evidence. So, as an academic coming to you, I thought, well, what can I bring you that maybe you don't know about already, or you haven't heard about already? So I can bring you a bit of that. How can we look at not be blinded by science? How can we be confident to actually challenge evidence that we see blasted in front of us when we're not necessarily the subject matter experts in the room? And it is possible to do that. You don't have to be a scientist to question the science. First of all, then, what is critical thinking? Now, as with a lot of things, there is no single sort of unified definition for critical thinking. So I've taken a couple from two white men, as you do. Now, there's a reason why I mentioned that, because, of course, part of being critical is understanding that there's bias in everything. If what gets to the top of the search engine, there is bias underpinning it. For want of a more equitable search algorithm, these are the definitions I've come to you with today. But I quite like these definitions, actually. I've tried to embold some words that I think are quite important here. So we've got from Michael Scriven, who is an academic philosopher. This guy is an education theorist. What Scriven's saying is that it's the skilled and active evaluation of information to guide belief and action. And so this is what I've highlighted, the guide belief and action, because critical thinking doesn't just stop at evaluating the information. It's what you do with it as well that's important. Lippmann has also told us that it's self-corrective and sensitive to context. And by that, we need to be open to changing our thinking on things and recognising that the context matters. The world is full of grey areas, as ChatGPT so beautifully pointed out to us earlier. My reality is different from yours, so that's why we need to think about context. Anybody recognise the 6 hats? Have anybody used these in their work? Hands up if you've used 6 hats. Or you've seen them? Which one do you think is the critical thinking hat? It's not a trick question. The which one?
The cautious.
Yeah. The cautious. Or the process.
There's no other.
Yeah, you're all right. You're all right. It's all of them. I think sometimes we might tend to think of critical thinking as being, the pedants, the cynics, people that are going to pick holes in everything, and I don't know. You all work with engineers, don't you? Engineers are renowned for being excellent critical thinkers, and they're also renowned. We also have other stereotypes we can attach to engineers at times, but it's not about it's not about being difficult, you know. It's all of these things. We wear these hats consciously as critical thinkers. Today, as I mentioned, we're mainly looking at the white hat actually, because we're looking at how we might analyse facts or question information, find information, but all of them are important. Another way of looking at it, which I quite like, is that critical thinking is these two hats this time. One that's just basically a combination of all of the other hats, and another one which is thinking about thinking, the metacognition, which is the bit that helps guide your actions. Anyway, okay, so I wanted to also touch upon why critical thinking for agile teams. Like, okay, for independent learning, as individuals seeking to learn, we can probably see its value. But why is it so important for agile teams? And I came up with kind of 4 areas that I think makes critical thinking very important for agile teams. The first one, collaboration. It can support collaboration because if, as critical thinkers, we are able to take on other perspectives, we're able to build trust amongst those we work with, because by showing that we're critical thinkers, we're going to make other people have more confidence in us and feel that they can trust us more. It can support decision making. Understanding, one of the things that's important is understanding that it's okay to change your mind, to change direction. And as a team, that's also important. Sometimes we go down the wrong alleyway and we need to reverse. Social responsibility is another one, especially if we're going to be using things like AI tooling more, then we need to be able to critique what comes out of those things. And finally, obviously one that I'm, I suppose, most passionate about is the learning. So being proficient as learners, being capable of learning in situ through acting and failing is obviously a very important component of working successfully as a team. And the reflection part as well, the being able to reflect on action, is very important for learning. I also just wanted to, in relation to that, I wanted to just plug this book. I don't know, has anyone ever read this book? Yeah, it's not a new book, I don't think. It's been out a few years, but it is quite a good introduction to critical thinking. I mean, that's essentially what he's talking about. And one of the sort of takeaways, well, some of my takeaways from this book was about the importance of being able to change your mind. There's actually data to back this up, that people who write a lot tend to change their mind a lot. And I suppose attached to that is the ability to practice intellectual humility. So to be able to sort of actually not attach your identity to your opinions. We can have values that may be persistent. One of my values being, around, continuous lifelong learning, but my opinions can change, whereas my values might hold true throughout my life. Okay. I'm going to try and make you think a bit now. So I want just a figure on this. Like, you can use your phones or whatever. I want a figure. How many decisions do you make in a day? You can just pluck it out of the search engine, but I'd like us to stick a number on this. In the thousands. Could anyone do a little bit of research really quickly and give me a number that they've got off the internet?
Did you
say thoughts or decisions?
Decisions.
33,000.
33,000. Okay, we've got a number, 33,000. I'll take that. We're going to come back to that. Keep that in mind. Because now it's time for an activity. Now, what I want you to do in this activity is I'm going to give you some statements. Okay, there's going to be 5 statements. And it's your job to decide where on a fact-opinion continuum you want these statements to be. And there's no right or wrong answer about it. Well, you can argue if there is or not, but we'll say that facts are things that can be proven, like at the extreme end, it can be proven unequivocally. An opinion is something at the extreme that is not provable at all. And so in order to get from opinion to fact, we need evidence that becomes unequivocal. Now, we get different kinds of evidence, of course. I would say there's not a hierarchy of evidence. Evidence is there's a flat structure. But we need to select the appropriate evidence for whatever it is that we're dealing with. So, as part of this activity, you're being asked to consider what evidence you would want. I don't really care what your answer is to any of the things. There's no right or wrong about it. What I want you to think about is what evidence would I need to see for that to become a fact? Or is that not possible? Does it have to be somewhere here? Does it have to be somewhere here? It'll also be up to you to decide what the context is. So there'll be things you don't know because I haven't given you the information. You might have to make it up, fabricate a context for this. Just to give you an example of a fact, Dungeons and Dragons, that is too long to write, is a role-playing game. That's a fact. An opinion is Dungeons and Dragons is lame. Okay, that's somebody's opinion. I'm not saying whether it's my opinion or not. Playing Dungeons and Dragons is beneficial for mental health. Now, there may be some weak evidence to support that. Maybe the evidence could get stronger if more studies were done, but at the moment, from what I can tell, there's only weak evidence in support of that, so it's going there. And Dungeons and Dragons is a popular game across a broad demographic. There is strong evidence, compelling evidence to support that as a fact. Okay, so that gives you the idea. Okay? Right. Are we ready? Okay, so I think it'll be roughly 1 between 2, so you'll have to sort of pair up with other people. Okay. Okay, so this is what we do in classrooms. Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot a bit and ask, I don't know, if there's anyone brave would be willing to share something that they learnt from that or a thought that occurred to them during that exercise. I am putting you on the spot.
We were just talking about the third bullet point, which are the hardest to classify. For me, personally, the first one's the hardest to classify because I have no concept of what that actually says. I have no idea if it's true. It looks like it could be true. So, yeah. And my friend here is a business analyst and I'm a project manager. And the difference between us is at least she had the good sense to go, it might be true, it might not be. And I was like, well, it looks true, so yeah, it must be true. So that's the hardest to classify for me.
Okay, interesting. So your subject knowledge or
Lack thereof.
okay made you struggle with the first one. Anyone else have a different thought or insight? Yeah.
Similar to that first one there, it took me a while to figure out what I was asking, but with some help with my friends here, I think, and I could be wrong, that it's not true. But I've never seen something written down that looks like it's said as a pure fact and considered that it's not true, then it's an opinion. I guess because it's like almost a maths equation where it's quite binary, it's either right or wrong. Like weird to think of that as an opinion, but it's no different to anything else that's said as factual, isn't it? Which is quite an interesting thing to from
Yeah. Okay. The idea that this is a continuum is sort of what was maybe new or a different angle for you. Well, that's what I heard. And that's interesting that you say that, actually, because when I walked around the room, almost everybody, I saw their sheets and they'd gone very binary. Like, I'm just holding this as an example. Did anybody go somewhere in the middle for any of them? For some of them, yeah. And give me an example, one that you went in the middle over there.
Use of Jira increases occupational stress of developers.
Okay. Okay. And what context did you put around that in order to make your decision?
Well, I guess it's dependent on what particular making the stressful environment, like how much tooling can be used or what part of the process you're currently using Jira for. So it depends, yeah, it's not just actual that yes, it's no either like fact or
Connection.
Yeah. In order to decide what kind of evidence you're looking for, you would need to put some context, put that statement into context. Yeah, sorry, you were going to say something.
Yeah, as part of people that did the extreme ends. So
Yeah.
I had, we did it together, so but is that a fact or an opinion? There was no middle for me. And I'll simply explain that as I believe, or I've always believed, that if something is not a fact, it's an opinion. So I don't think there's a middle ground. I may be wrong, it's just my own personal perspective. So it's just the way I've just gone back with things. If it's, for example, in my line of work, if you come and say something, if you can back it up with data, it's an opinion.
Yeah.
So for me, there's no middle ground. It's that one, it's that a fact or is it an opinion? So that's why I did the extreme ends. I know when you came over, you spoke about it, but we had some questions. I'll say the second one that says Debbie from account has been drinking my lactose-free milk. That was hard to classify. That was the hardest to classify for us because I don't know who Debbie is. Debbie could be anybody, and it could be true. Some people could have seen her drinking milk. There could be evidence of photos or videos or stuff like that. Or it could be mere gossip. So it's probably someone in the office doesn't like her. Just was put on the spot. So it could be anything. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's the one that brought up all those questions for you. I suppose an interesting observation for me is that you all approached it differently. I walked around and I didn't see any consistency in the responses, which I found interesting. And the fact that some people like to be quite binary, again, that is interesting. What I would say is that the context, if you're going to go down the binary route, you have to think very carefully then about the context around it in order to be able to prove or disprove that, because it would totally change what evidence you were going to attach. Just as, you gave the example of the lactose-free milk. Maybe that one was the one that jumped out at you, but I would say the same applies to some of the other ones as well. The one about the JIRA increasing occupational stress among developers could be a fact if that's your team and everyone on your team is telling you they're stressed by it. So anyway, I will leave you to think about that. We have just a few minutes left. There's so many grey areas in this world. Maybe if you go away, if you're a bit more conscious in thinking about how you approach the collection or the decisions around what evidence you might need in order to decide if something's true or not, if that makes sense. But before I introduce the activity, I asked you to pluck a figure out of the Google engine. How many decisions do we make in a day? Okay. Now, various sources suggest, according to Google, that the average adult makes 33,000 to 35,000 total decisions a day, blah, 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 blah. Won't read it all out. How do we feel about that as a statistic?
It feels almost impossible until you become more aware and you actually start to analyze it.
Yeah.
And on face value, it's like 35,000. I don't think so. But then we make a lot of decisions that we don't actually, that are almost subconscious.
Okay, so we might include a lot of subconscious decisions. So that sort of then you might think, okay, well, why are we defining a decision? What point you wanted to make there?
Because I saw that exact page when I did it with Google, and I think one of the things that I first looked at was the Harvard Business Review. It feels like quite a credible source from my experience, but that's just, again, more anecdotal, but that influenced whether how credible I was thinking that number is.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, Harvard Business Review, I would think it was a fairly credible. It's certainly very popular, isn't it? You would hope that they would fact check, that the editors would fact check things, wouldn't you? Obviously, when you start to dig into it a bit more, it might open up more questions in your mind, as it did for you. I mean, if you work it out by time, how that equates, how much time that allocates to a decision, that's sort of every 2 seconds. If you're just counting the time that you're awake. I don't know, do we feel any differently about it? It makes you maybe think again about, well, how are we classifying a decision? What's a decision then in that case? Now, what I really wanted to get to was that this statistic is one of many statistics we find floating around the internet that comes top of the Google search algorithm when we ask it this question. But it actually is very difficult to get to the origin of this statistic. If you try and dig into where this comes from, I mean, the Harvard Business Review article just has 2 links to 2 different other articles here when it says various sources suggest. That's not good enough as far as I'm concerned. It's not convincing me. It feels to me like the authors just sort of thought, oh, I better put some figures in to sound a bit more convincing. Now, look at the title, Why You Should Make Journaling a Daily Practice. How relevant is it? How relevant is it that this statistic is accurate? Did we even need to include it in the first place? That would be my response here. If I was the editor, I'd be saying, let me just lose that bit. You don't need that. It's not adding anything to your argument. But if you go digging into it, you find that lots of people are referencing it, just due to the fact that it comes top of the search engine. It's everywhere. It's in other articles. Somebody said here, delving into the depths of scientific research, we uncover blah, blah, blah. Well, doesn't seem very deep to me. You're in the shallow end. We need to go back to the source. If we're going to use statistics or rely on statistics to make decisions about things that are going to impact us and other people, we need to be a bit more careful about how we apply them and how we communicate them. I mean, this is just to show you that academics are also doing this because they've also used this statistic and they've also put a reference to a dodgy Wall Street Journal article. How that got through peer review, I don't know. This person, Yoshiyuki, asks on ResearchGate where this comes from. Is it true? I don't think anybody has the answer for him. He's not alone in his thinking. There's a whole massive long thread on it, on, what is this, on Psychology Stack Exchange. Somebody's actually taken the trouble to write a really long analysis around where the statistic may or may not come from. Anyway, point is, what does this make you then feel about the authors of the article? Disappointment. Okay. Now, you all work with engineers, right? And they're a stickler for detail. You have to be careful sharing, facts, science with engineers, because I guarantee you they will be the ones reading that Psychology Stack Exchange thread, and it will undermine your credibility. So just a lesson there. A rule of thumb from an academic, if you can't read and understand the original source and the statistic presented doesn't have a discussion about how it's obtained, don't treat it as valuable. We had some valuable statistics earlier from Shane, because there was a discussion around it and she showed you exactly how she'd acquired those statistics, so they were valuable. Right. I'm not going to dwell on statistics. Sorry, it's late, we're all tired. Okay, so I'm going to skip the next few little bits, actually. There's some stuff about academic bias in academic research, which I think you can do without at this time of day. I will give you a few tips, though, to go home with about how we can evaluate, in particular, scholarly evidence when we don't have a PhD and we're not a subject matter expert. So, firstly, contextualise. Can we put this into context? A quick, easy way to do that is to look at the citation list. So, where else is this work being referenced? That will help to give you an idea of who else has managed to apply this work. You can also then get a sense of how compatible it is with your own context. If it's not relevant to your context, it's probably not valuable to you. We can also think about the results, whether the results are presented in a way that's similar. Now, as we saw with the decision statistic, whatever, we couldn't find any other sources coming up with similar statistics. So that makes it seem quite tangential. Another thing we can ask is, does the abstract clearly state a result? Not always, but often when you read the abstract of an academic paper, you find those ones that don't clearly state a result, that may be because they have less substance underlying them. They may be a little bit veering off on a tangent. Another thing we can look at, which is easy to do, is the references. So the references in the academic paper itself. And I'm telling you this so that next time you see on LinkedIn, like that one of those phrases, studies suggest, or research has shown, you can actually go and check. And you don't have to know a lot about the subject area, but you can know enough to check on the references, where they're published. Are they published in peer-reviewed journals? Are they relevant to the original study? Are the citations proper? Again, I'm going to skip through this, but there's a colleague wrote a really good paper, and these are just a few snapshots from her. Well, it's not a paper, actually, it's an article online about how you can kind of critique information on the web, and it's a good place to go and get a few tips. To summarise, because I know we're kind of out of time. Critical thinkers, we need to, as critical thinkers, acknowledge complexity. Unfortunately, we don't live in a binary world. There are some things we can classify as fact or opinion. A lot of other things fall somewhere in the middle, and it's debatable whereabouts they fall. And we have to embrace that, be open to that and think about, okay, well, what's the context and what evidence do I need to see to place that information? Go back to the source. Always have a questioning mind. When you read things, when people try to sort of convince you of things, quoting science at you, where does that come from? What's the original study? Don't be blinded by the science, and always be prepared to change your mind. And I think that's pretty much it. I was going to give you some book recommendations. You've kind of had some already. But yeah, that's kind of it. Sorry, we're out of time, but thank you.